In today's episode of Today in World War II, April 3rd, the Soviets massacre over 20,000 Poles. The British capture Asmara, the capital of Eritrea in East Africa. The Japanese focus all of their attention on one Filipino division on Bataan and crush resistance there. The Battle of Manners Street takes place in New Zealand, and the British send 41 dive bombers against the Tirpitz in Norway. And finally, the Soviets get closer and closer to Vienna, and fierce negotiations start to save that historic city from full destruction. Let's get started. Okay, so on April 3rd, 1940, one of the saddest, tragic, and infuriating examples of Soviet brutality happened today when the Soviet secret police, we know it as the KGB. Back then, it was known as the NKVD, and they massacred over 20,000 Poles. Now, listen to who they massacred. They massacred police. They massacred military officers. They massacred intellectuals. They massacred landowners. All right? They wiped off the head, the intellectual head of Poland, the ones they could get when they invaded in 1939, when as part of the secret codicil to the agreement with the von Ribbentrop and Molotov agreement, where they agreed to divide Poland together. But when they came in and they captured the army units that were stabbed in the back, they came in and did their cleansing of anybody they felt could be a threat to their regime. They only wanted uneducated people, workers, right? Anybody else, they were capitalistic bourgeois and enemies of the state. So I will tell you this. Forgive me if I'm alluding to this too much in this series, but it's important that you understand that what's happening in Russian-controlled Ukraine is exactly what they were doing in World War II to the Poles and anywhere else in the Baltics, anywhere where they took over. This is what happened, and that's what's happening over there as well. The brutality is in their genes, unfortunately. And I can say that because I'm married to a Russian for 25 years and I've lived there for 30 plus years, off and on, going back and forth. So, you have to have your eyes wide open when it comes to Russia. They're not your friends. Okay? If you love democracy and freedom, they're not your friends. If you love them, think about what you love. On April 3rd, 1941, British troops captured Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, which was, at the time, Eritrea didn't exist as an independent nation. That came after the war, but this was part of the Italian East African Empire colony. And the British troops consisted mostly of African and colonial troops. There were very few British, white British units that were fighting against the Italians in East Africa. Those units, the Desert Rats, the Second Armored Division, the Aussies, they were fighting Rommel. Or I don't think Rommel was there yet. Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, he just got there. Anyway, they were using mostly colonial troops. I guess that's what they considered the B team. But luckily, they were fighting against the B team, the Italians, in this war, so they got away with it. On April 3rd, 1942, and this is the beginning of the end for the resistance, American and Filipino resistance in the Philippines. After a heavy artillery and aerial bombardment for about 6 hours, Japanese troops had launched an attack on the peninsula, but they focused on one part of the line that was held by the Filipino 41st Infantry Division, and they broke through. They penetrated the lines, and this is going to start. This, like I said, this is the beginning of the end for the Americans and Filipinos on Bataan. It's going to take a while. A little, not going to happen tomorrow, but it's coming. On April 3rd, 1943, the Battle of Manners Street happened, and I'm sure that most people, even a lot of people that follow World War II, were not aware of this. But here is something that unfortunately is more of the dark side of having the Americans come to your country. In this case, I mean, the Kiwis loved us. They wanted us to be there and so on and so forth. And yet what caused this battle, this riot, if you want to call it. The battle was just a funny name for it, but it was a riot. Okay, it was between American servicemen and New Zealand servicemen and civilians. And why did it happen? Because racist, most likely Southern troops, American troops from those areas where there was Jim Crow refused to allow Maori soldiers to enter the Allied Services Club. Maoris, who were not segregated, who were in their own country, but they were darker. They're Polynesian. Okay, that was not what these racist Americans wanted, and so they started fighting, and it was a huge deal. Okay, but because we needed to keep solidarity with our, both sides agreed, well, we're gonna censor this and not really talk about it. But these types of things happened more frequently than we would like to have. And then unfortunately, that happened. And there's a movie, not a very good movie, kind of a schlocky movie, but still, I like to watch the movie because it was a pretty good indication of what things were like in when the Americans were preparing to invade France in 43, 44. It's called Yanks. It was one of it was a good little movie. And that same thing happened there when the British girls were dancing with some Negro soldiers. I call them Negro, that's what they're called then, black soldiers. And there was a big fight that broke out because of that. And it happened way too often. And we're still dealing with racism in our country, even in 2025. On our April 3rd, 1944, the RAF launched Operation Tungsten, and they're going after the Tirpitz. The Tirpitz had a very illustrious and honorable career as a sitting duck target for the RAF during the war. I think it did one sortie. It turned back, never really attacked any merchant ships or any convoys going to Russia or the Soviet Union. And boy, I tell you what, they tried. The Brits tried every way to sink it. It took them multiple times. This time they didn't sink it, but they did score a lot of hits. They were using Barracuda dive bombers. They attacked it and they scored 15 hits. Now the Tirpitz was built really well. All German battleships were built very well. It was hard to sink them, and this didn't sink it. But RAS, they're working on it. It's going to happen soon. And then finally, on April 3rd, 1945, the Second Ukrainian Front penetrated the German defensive line between Wiener Neustadt and Neusiedler Lake. And they started advancing towards Vienna, Austria, I should say. And the leader of the Austrian resistance met with them and pleaded with them to allow them the chance to clear out Vienna to prevent the full destruction of that jewel of architecture and history. And luckily, they were able to do so. We'll chronicle this as we move forward in our video series. But that's it for April 3rd. I appreciate you watching this video, and I will see you tomorrow.